Today we're going to look at reading and understanding streams. We're going to cover the basics to start off with, and then we're going to move into actually looking at how these things affect where you find gold. To start off with, let's look at what we find in a stream. And the first thing you're going to find is water. Why do we need to understand about water? Well, water is everything. Everything when it comes to streams, and everything when it comes to finding gold in streams. So we need to have a basic understanding of how water reacts with everything in a stream. What do we know about water? We know that water has weight. It's got density. Everything has density. You know, rocks have density, gold has density. Everything has density, but water itself has an important role to play because it varies so much in a river that we need to understand all the variables and how they're affecting things in a stream. Now, when water's not moving, it doesn't really affect anything. It just sits very calm and tranquil. But that's not what we're interested in knowing. We want to know the effects that water has when the river's in flood. So what do we need to know about water when the river's in flood? Well, we need to know that because that water has density, that also means other things. If you've got something that's got weight to it, such as water or a rock, when it's sitting still like it is there in that pool of water, it's not doing anything. But once you take that density and you add movement to it, you give it energy, like this rock. So if you take the rock and you throw it, it moves in a straight line. Water wants to do the same thing. When you start water in motion and it starts moving, it wants to move in a straight line. All things, regardless of their density, once you start them in motion, they will want to move in a straight line. So what changes that? What makes the direction change? It's objects, obstacles, things like that. And that's when we start getting into understanding what we're seeing in a stream, and then we're trying to understand why it is that has affected it that way. So let's talk about water velocity. What makes water velocity increase? Now, there's a few things that are going to do this. The main one is the volume of water. So when you get lots of rain, the amount of water in a stream will increase. So that as the water increases, the velocity will increase. Now, why? I'm going to say this, it sounds really silly to talk about this, but we need to understand. Why does the water velocity increase when there's more water in a stream? It's because we're having an effect on that water, and that effect is gravity. Water will always want to travel down. And obviously in a stream, downstream means the water is traveling downward. Seems simple, but a lot of people don't quite grasp that until they're actually told about it. So the more water you have in a stream, the more the water rises and the more that water wants to run downstream, so the velocity increases. Now, what else increases velocity in a stream? Because it's not just the volume of water. Other things will increase the velocity. You may have a constant flow running down a stream. And I'm just looking straight down this section of river here, and it's nice and straight. We don't have any obstacles in the middle. So is there anything there that you can see that would affect the velocity of water that was travelling down there when this river is in flood? And once again, it may seem quite silly to talk about this, but you need to get your head around things that will affect the velocity of water to understand where gold is going to be deposited. We've got trees on either side. they're going to slow that water velocity down. We need to understand that even with the same volume of water that's running down this stream during a flood, there are different areas of velocity that water will be travelling. The centre of the stream will be the fastest, so it's going to be carrying the highest volume of water and the fastest moving water. On the edges, on the two banks, that is going to be slowing down. And it's going to be slowing down because of obstacles and because of friction against the banks. In the centre, you only have water. On the sides where the edge of that water is meeting the bank, as the water is running along the edge of the bank, it's creating friction and it's slowing the water down. So your two sides are going to be where things start to drop out. What else do we know about water velocity? Well, when you talk velocity, you're talking speed, how fast it's moving. But when something's moving, it's taking energy with it, just like a rock. Now, when that energy that is travelling along comes against something that's stationary, that energy needs to go somewhere. So, if it's hitting something that's movable, it will take that energy and exert it on whatever it's hitting and either move it, or that energy will be pushed in a different direction. So that's a fairly hefty rock, and we throw it at that tree. All the energy in that rock, where's that going to go? It stopped and dropped. It didn't continue on. The tree stopped it. Once again, sounds very obvious, but water has that same energy. So when we're talking velocity with water, we're talking water pressure, because that water exerts pressure onto the objects that it's running into. And this is where it starts to get fairly complicated when you're looking at a stream, because you need to understand how the water moves when it strikes an object and how it moves around an object. This is the importance of understanding what you are looking at in a stream. So what we'll do is I'll do a demonstration just to show you how water and water pressure affects materials. We'll start off with low water pressure just by pouring water into the dish with a few rocks in it and see what it does. Now, not much of that material moved. It picked some of the lights up from the bottom and brought them to the top. This is a subject we're going to cover later in the video. Now let's change that, and we'll give it a lot higher velocity and a lot more pressure by letting that water fall further, giving it more force and more effect on that rock. As you can see, a lot of that material just got moved and pushed out of that dish straight away. A lot of what's left in here is only the large material. All of the fine stuff got pushed out and moved. So that's the effect that water pressure, velocity, whatever you want to call it, has on materials. Alright, let's look at a few other things now. You'll often hear people talk about inside bends when we're talking gold prospecting, and how inside bends where they have gravel bars accumulated are always good spots to find gold. We're looking at an inside bend over there. Now, most of the time that's very true. But the thing that's never really explained is why is the inside bend a good spot to find gold? Well, let's go back to where we were looking downstream at that nice straight section and we were talking about water velocity and water speed moving in a straight line, and how water always wants to travel in a straight line. So I'm standing on a bend here in the stream, and on the far side is the inside bend, and I'm standing on the outside bend. So as that water's coming into the bend, it's still wanting to travel in a straight line. So as it's curling around, as the water's curving around, it's wanting to keep travelling in a straight line. So it's hitting the outside of the bend. That's where your main velocity, the highest velocity and the most water pressure is on the outside of the bend. And on the inside of the bend is where you've got the least amount of velocity and the least amount of pressure. That's why you get your big accumulations of gravel on inside bends, because that's where everything can drop out, because there's no velocity or very little velocity and very little water pressure. What happens on the outside bend? We end up with an erosion effect that's always happening every time you get a flood, because that water is flying in fast with speed and force, and it's hitting this and it's carving it, and then it's wanting to turn again. Because it's still in a bend, it goes straight again and hits it again and goes and just keeps on bouncing off the outside bend and carving the material away. So does the material from this side make it over to there? Not really. The material that's carved away from the outside of this bend travels further down. The material that's on the inside of the bend has travelled from upstream. Now the water does vortex in a bend, meaning that as it strikes this outside, once again, because the water wants to travel straight, it's hitting a wall, and it rises up because all the pressure's pushing on it. It pushes the water up, and at the same time you've got gravity working on it, which sends it back down. So the water starts to curl from the bottom and pushes across that way. But you've also got the flow running downstream. So it does curl and lift some, but most of what gets carved away gets carried downstream. We'll go and have a look at something else. Obstructions in a stream. What do they do to the water velocity? What do they do to the water pressure? Well, with the water velocity, they slow it down and they speed it up. Obstructions do two things: increase the pressure and they decrease the pressure. But you need to know where the pressure increases and where the pressure decreases with obstructions. So let's just have a look at one obstruction, and we'll just understand a bit better about what's going on with this one obstruction. We're in the middle of the stream, and I'm standing on an obstruction, and we'll look at how that affects the water flow. So you can see we've got shallow water there in the gravel, and then we've got this hole of water right in front of the obstruction, quite deep. So what is this? It's a fallen tree. Well, it's actually two fallen trees. So this obstruction is one that's not permanent. Meaning that in other floods that come down here will eventually move this. But non-permanent obstructions play a very important role in redistributing gold that's actually in the gravels. So what has happened is that this tree may have been growing along the banks here, but more than likely it's washed down and it's got caught here. And when it got caught, it created an area that the water had to move around. And when it's done that, it's changed the velocity and the water pressure in this one location. So as the water was coming down, it was hitting that root ball and it was stopping. And it was creating a high pressure area right around the front of that obstruction. So it created high pressure there, and behind it, it created low pressure. So it allowed materials to drop out. Now the important thing to understand with these obstructions is the shape of them. Because that's a temporary and it's only there until the next flood, a lot of that high pressure was working underneath it. It wasn't just going around the sides, and it wasn't going just over the top, it was working all the way around that. And that means that any of the gold that was in the gravels before that got there has now been chewed out in that deep area, and it's been lifted and pushed around the sides and carried further downstream. That's important for one reason. Any of the gold that was down deep in those gravels has now been lifted and brought back to the surface. These areas where you get these deep holes of water, if you can find areas of gravel directly after them, that's a good spot to look for gold, because any of the gold that's been down deep has been brought from the bottom because of the power of the water, like that, all that extra water pressure has pushed, lifted it and redeposited it back on top. So these temporary obstructions in a stream, what about the gold that sits behind them? You need to think about how long that obstruction's been sitting there. Be it a tree that's fallen over and it's a root ball, or be it a large rock, or a boulder, or whatever you'd like to call it. We often say, you should always look behind big rocks because, stuff will drop out behind it. How long has that big rock been sitting there? The longer something sits there, the more floods that go around that object, the more chance it's got of collecting gold. If the object moves every time you have a flood, it's very unlikely you're going to find a lot of gold behind it. So just looking at these large rocks here, and I say it's going to take a fair bit of force to move it. But the next big flood that comes through, it's probably going to move these rocks. So you need to understand that when you're looking at these things that cause high and low pressure points in a stream, you need to be looking for those ones that have been sitting there for a long time. And such, or the things that you are looking for, are trees. These trees have seen a lot of floods, and you can tell simply by the amount of gravel that's humped up along this line of trees. You can see this large hump of gravel. And that's because these trees have been here for a lot of years. And you look at that log jam. Now that's only a temporary thing, that would have come down in the last flood. But the tree that the log jam is wrapped around has been there for a lot of years. And trees are always a good thing to capture gold. Another log jam. Another one there. So we're talking about obstructions. We're talking about temporary ones. How does that affect the gold that's in the gravels? Well, when you get a temporary obstruction, one that comes down and then lodges there, and which creates all that pressure, it affects the gravels in that it builds up a lot of pressure around the obstruction, And when that happens, all those gravels that have been there for many, many floods, all of a sudden get the extra pressure on it and they start moving all those materials. Here's one such depression. So whatever was here has been washed away. Now that may have been a large tree that's been washed out in the last flood, or it may have been something that got washed down here and then got moved on as the flood water rose, or the log jam or whatever it was got dislodged. So any of the gold that has been deposited in the gravels around here has been lifted out and carried further downstream. Once again, deep down, gold's heavy, it wants to travel to the bottom. This one area has been chewed out, so any of the gold in all the layers that's gone right down through has been lifted and brought back to the top and carried further down. So we've talked about water, water velocity and water pressure. Now let's start looking at how that water moves the materials and how the pressure affects where the materials get moved and where the materials get deposited. This area of bedrock is what you would call a permanent obstacle. Now we're looking at this and we've got high areas of bedrock on the side, and then as you get closer to the stream, the bedrock has been worn down lower, and that's where the water is currently running. Now the reason it's worn lower there is because you've got the most pressure there and the most volume of material that's moving across there. That doesn't necessarily mean that's where you're going to find the most gold. All that's telling you is that's getting the most pressure on it. It's getting pounded with moving rocks, it's getting pounded with sand and silt and water, and it's just constantly chewing at it. Anything that's travelling along is going to be travelling along at a great amount of speed with a lot of force, and it's not going to have much time to drop out. You want to start looking off to the sides, over on the either bank where the water velocity is slowing down, and anywhere where the bedrock is creating a point that the material can drop off behind and it can get out of the flow. So we've got these fractures in the bedrock. And you can see there's gravel and rock caught up in these fractures. And then you'll come to other spots where there is not much gravel caught up in that fracture. And it's almost clean there. You're looking downstream, so you know that the water pressure is hitting that and it's lifting all the material out and it's carrying it further away. That little crevice there, that's running at roughly 45 degrees to the angle of the flow, so it is able to capture some material and hold it. Let's work one of these crevices in the bedrock and see what we get. I moved the material off the top, and got down to the bottom and moved some of these rocks that were wedged in there really hard. Started scraping them out with the crevicing tool. The first two dishes the material off the top didn't have any gold in them at all. But once I'd got the material off the top and I started working down in the crevices, this is what I got in the first dish. You can see there's some nice bits of gold there. I'll keep working that crevice and see how much more we can get. So I work this crevice as much as I can work it. I've got water coming in. I work it down there right into a deep pocket, which once again I can't clean it right out. But this is the gold that come out of that one crevice. So that's not a bad start to the day. So let's just take a look at what's sitting behind that crevice. Got the main centre of the river there, and on this side we've got a bit of a flow happening. We've got a hump of gravel, and I've worked the crevice just there above that hump of gravel. Alright, we'll go and find another crevice to work and see if we can point out some more of these low pressure areas where the gold gets trapped. So I've found a little spot down here that fits the bill perfectly to find some nice little pickers. Now I've just had the small crowbar in to a little pocket, and it's going down probably 200mm, and it's all hard packed stone. I'm having a really hard time getting these stones out of this pocket. So I've just come back up. I'm going to grab the yabby pump and a couple of different fittings to try and get down and suck all this out and see if I can get right to the very bottom of this little tiny pocket in the bedrock. I say these are the types of things that will produce good sized pickers. So fingers crossed, when I clean this out, we're going to actually see a couple of good bits of gold. I'll grab the yabby pump, I'll take this down and show you what I'm looking at before I suck it out, and then we'll see what we get. Down here on the stream, got the yabby pump, and I've put all the attachments on it with a very narrow little straw or pipe. And we're looking back upstream. Notice this area of gravel, and then we've got these bits of bedrock sticking up. We follow the edge of this bedrock. We've got all the gravel on this side. We're coming along. We've got this bit of bedrock, and it curls around. So we've got all this nice high velocity material moving around there, lots of pressure pushing it all. And as it curls around, the water pressure dies, or the water pressure backs off, velocity slows down, and we've got this lovely little pocket full of hard packed stone right in behind the edge of that bit of bedrock. Now if I don't get some gold out of that, I'm going to be very, very disappointed. Those little spots are normally what holds the really good pickers out here. I'll grab the yabby pump, I'll clean this out, and then I'll show you what come out of it. Fingers crossed. I'm still getting more material out of this hole. I haven't finished cleaning it out yet. It's still going down. And there's another pocket that goes back in underneath the bedrock. So what I'm doing with the yabby pump is, rather than just sucking, I'm pushing it back into that pocket in behind or in underneath the bedrock. I'm sucking the water up, and then I'm pumping it in as fast as I can and pushing all the material out of that pocket. Now the water's cleared, and I can actually see gold just sitting on the rock. So I just grab the small tool, not big gold, just little bits, and I'll point out these two bits of gold that's just sitting on the edge of the rock. There's one bit right there, there's another bit right there at the end of the tool. So there's two bits that have came from in this pocket up here. Now when I say it's deep, the screwdriver's gone in right to the hilt and it still keeps going. So I'll just keep pumping water into that pocket and seeing what other gold comes out. So I'll just grab the sniffer bottle and I'll sniff these 2 bits of gold up that's just sitting on the bedrock. That's one. Whoop. That's two. So I wonder what's in the pan. Oh, I'll keep pumping and keep getting material out of it, and then we'll pan that out and see what's in there. This is take 2. I just did the big reveal and showed you what was in the dish, but I didn't have the mic turned on, so you couldn't hear a word that was going on. So there is no picker in here, but there's some nice flakes. So once again, I'll pan it back and I'll show you what's in here. A few bits of lead. Get rid of the lead out of the road. Move these little stones back. So that's what's coming out of there. Not bad. I was hoping for a lot better, but you get that. I'm pretty happy with that. Right, hopefully I can find another little pocket like that, and it will have a couple of pickers in it. So let's get back to it and see if we can find another couple of spots to work. Well, it's getting late in the afternoon. It's time to pack up and head home. So I didn't go too bad. Just worked a few crevices. I didn't worry about working any of the gravels today. I didn't get any pickers. I got a couple of little rough bits that roll around under your fingers. We'll have a look at what we got, and then I'm going to head for home. So I don't think I went too bad. Alright, been a while since I've done a video, so it's been good to get out. Until the next one, have a good one. Hope you're finding lots of yellow wherever you are. Get out there and get into it. And I'll catch you all on the next video. See yous.